Good evening, comrades. I'm here to talk to you about Althusser. So, there must have been something in the water in French Algeria, or maybe Marx was right, and the mode of production and material life there had just the right conditions to create a certain culture. Because in this case, so frickin' many cultural philosophers came from French Algeria. We got Derrida and Cixous, who I think we've already studied, and now Althusser is yet another French Algerian philosopher. He viewed his and all philosophers' duty as that of representing the class struggle in theory. He expanded on Marx's work, focusing on viewing history and society through the lens of the class struggle. Althusser's seminal work was his theory around ideology and how it becomes self-perpetuating. He largely applied his thoughts to capitalism, but in my opinion, they could just as equally be applied to most any mode of societal and capital reorganization, such as socialism or communism. So I'll do my best to explain his theory of ideology to you, and I'm going to be discussing it in reference to a wicked Jim Carrey movie of the 90s, The Truman Show. So if you're not familiar with it, The Truman Show is a movie where Jim Carrey's character, Truman Burbank, lives inside of a giant movie set where he lives not knowing that he's the star of a reality TV show. He's just living his everyday life while everyone around him are actors. So his wife, family, friends, employers, everybody is an actor.
While the world he inhabits is in some respects counterfeit, there's nothing fake about Truman himself. No scripts, no cue cards. It isn't always Shakespeare, but it's genuine. It's a life.
Althusser posited that in order for a system to work day after day and year after year, it must reproduce the conditions for its success, which include A, the productive forces, and B, the existing relations of production. So within the first one, the productive forces, the labor power must be reproduced, including skills being taught and learned somehow, and a workforce able to come back to work the next day and year after year, which implies that they must have sufficient wages to pay for shelter, food, clothing, etc. So in addition, though, to these productive forces being reproduced, the relations of production also need to be reproduced within a system. This means that people must be obedient. They must understand the rules of the system that they're supposed to follow. Essentially, they have to be compliant and willing to work. Just in case any of that wasn't perfectly clear, my buddy George here can summarize it better than I can.
You know what they want? They want obedient workers. Obedient workers. People who are just smart enough to run the machines and do the paperwork and just dumb enough to passively accept all these increasingly shittier jobs with the lower pay, the longer hours, the reduced benefits, the end of overtime, and the vanishing pension that disappears the minute you go to collect it.
If we look at the Truman Show as the system of organization, we can see this play out in that the show needs its productive forces. It literally needs the producers, but also the actors, the lighting guys, and the set to be functioning. And of course, Truman himself must be kept alive and unaware of his role in all of this. All of these can be interpreted to be the productive forces of the show that must be maintained to keep the show running. But then, the show also needs the relations of production to be replicated day after day. The show doesn't just need its workforce to be alive and fed. They need to have working relations so that they can continue to produce the show. They all need to work together cooperatively to make it happen again, including, and perhaps more than anything, they need Truman to remain in the dark about the fact that he's the star of the show. Because if he woke up one day to the fact that he was a reality TV star, the relations of production would be disturbed.
Can I help? Oh, yeah, I have an appointment at Gable Enterprises.
They went bust.
Again, George sums it up better than I can.
But I'll tell you what they don't want. They don't want a population of citizens capable of critical thinking. They don't want well-informed, well-educated people capable of critical thinking. They're not interested in that. That doesn't help them. That's against their interest. That's right.
So Marx had conceived of society as being like an edifice or a building composed of the infrastructure, the economic base, and the superstructure. The superstructure is made of the politico-legal, aka the law and the state, as well as what he called the ideology, which is the religious, ethical, legal, cultural, and political ideologies that compose it. So Marx's edifice analogy had the infrastructure as the foundation of the building, and then the political, legal, and ideology components make up the floors of the superstructure built on top. What's important to remember here is that what happens in the upper floors is determined by what happens on the lower floors, as I alluded to earlier with my stupid joke about French Algerians. Within Marx's metaphor of the edifice, Althusser is primarily interested in the ideology component of the superstructure. It's important to understand that to Althusser, ideology does not simply mean one's set of beliefs. It relates to why people act in the interest of the state. And the way I read it, he's also implying that ideology is perhaps, or it perhaps explains why people act in the interests of upholding the state, specifically when the state does not have their best interests in mind. It's only concerned with maintaining the status quo. But perhaps I'm doing a poor job of explaining it, so I'll let Mr. Carlin have another go.
The white collar, blue collar, doesn't matter what color shirt you have on. Good, honest, hardworking people continue. These are people of modest means. Continue to elect these rich cocksuckers who don't give a fuck about them. They don't give a fuck about you. They don't give a fuck about you. They don't care about you at all. At all. At all. Yeah.
Marx borrowed Freudian terms in defining ideology, which he called a false consciousness, arguing that people misunderstood what's really going on. They believe that the system is fair and not rigged towards those who control the means of production, whereas in reality, as my friend George just pointed out, the system is rigged to maintain the status quo of the system. In regards to the Truman Show, everything in Truman's life is coordinated to prevent him from realizing that for him, the entire system is rigged to keep him in the dark and keep the show running.
I have love handles. Yeah. Little ones.
Truman, you're gonna be late.
Okay.
If we're free, why do we act like we're not? Why do people support fascist dictators when their conditions get bad? Or why would poor Americans who pay almost no taxes care about voting for a billionaire who's promising to lower their taxes? The answer is ideology. And so how does the state get people to act against their own best interests? Well, according to Althusser, there's two components to how they do this. First, there's the repressive state apparatus, what he shortens to the RSA. And it uses the ideology of fear through the police, the military, the prison system, and government. So the repressive state apparatus functions massively and primarily through violence, or at least the threat of violence, although it does have an ideological component to its functioning.
You and I are not in the big club. By the way, it's the same big club they use to beat you over the head with all day long when they tell you what to believe.
Second way that the state gets people to act against their own best interests is with what Althusser calls the ideological state apparatuses. So that is the churches, schools, the family, the legal system, the political system, trade unions, the media, sports, other cultural apparatuses such as the arts. So ideological state apparatuses, or ISAs, function massively and predominantly by ideology. Although, like RSAs, the repressive state apparatuses, it also has a violent component to its functioning. So a school will still have the threat of punishment if you don't behave properly within the school system.
There's a reason education sucks, and it's the same reason that it will never, ever, ever be fixed. It's never going to get any better. Don't look for it. Be happy with what you got. Because the owners of this country don't want that. I'm talking about the real owners now. The real owners, the big wealthy business interests that control things and make all the important decisions.
Even within the Truman Show, we can see this through the education of Truman as a child.
As Truman grew up, we were forced to manufacture ways to keep him on the island.
I'd like to be an explorer, like the great Magellan.
Oh, you're too late. There's really nothing left to explore.
Finally, I came up with the concept of Kirk's drowning.
Most effective. Truman's been terrified of the water ever since.
So they use ideological state apparatuses as a method of exerting ideological influence to support the status quo. Because of this, the ISAs are both the stake and the site of bitter class struggles. They're to be fought over and won, and at the same time, they're what's used to fight these class struggles. The role of the repressive state apparatuses is to secure by force the political conditions of the reproduction of relations of production. And here Althusser specifically refers to labor. So he's saying that the RSA enforces the relations of exploitation. These repressive state apparatuses, therefore, must secure the ideological state apparatuses because the latter largely controls the relations of production.
That's what the owners count on, the fact that Americans will probably remain willfully ignorant of the big red, white, and blue dick that's being jammed up their assholes every day. Because the owners of this country know the truth. It's called the American dream, because you have to be asleep to believe it.
This is where it starts getting a little bit denser. So Althusser relies on Marx's The German Ideology to postulate that ideology is conceived as a pure illusion. All reality is external to it. It's an imaginary construction, a bricolage, similar to Freud's dream theory, as it constituted the day's residues from a full and positive reality, as Freud put it, constructed to make it a non-historical reality. So Althusser says that there's no ideology in and of itself, there's only ideology by the subject and for the subjects. Subjects here meaning concrete individuals. So without Truman, there is no Truman Show. Without subjects, there is no ideology.
Well, for me, there is no difference between a private life and a public life. My life is the Truman Show. The Truman Show is a lifestyle. It's a noble life. It is a truly blessed life.
It also takes great pains to prove that ideology is material, in that it's practiced by material people in material ways. That is to say, subjects perform actions and rituals in service of ideology, whether it be religious, political, or otherwise. And in this way, Althusser argues, as one of his central points, that ideology interpolates us as subjects. Interpolation is one of his main concepts, and it means to answer the call of ideology. We respond to it, and in doing so, we become subjects, not just individuals. We're individuals within the rules of punctuality, politeness, and obedience to authority. And this is how we all act in service of capitalism or whatever system of societal organization we fall within. Althusser goes a step further, saying that because ideology is eternal, it is and always has been, and because it interpolates us as subjects, therefore we are and always have been subjects. And we can see this in The Truman Show, in that before he was born, he was already a subject of the show.
1.7 million were there for his birth. 220 countries tuned in for his first step.
I believe Truman is the first child to have been legally adopted by a corporation.
That's correct.
Brilliant.
This is where Althusser's theory gets a little denser, but follow me here. So Althusser argues that it necessarily follows that the subject duplicates itself in what he calls a speculary, meaning a mirror structure, but actually that it's a double speculary. So this mirror duplication is constitutive of ideology, but it also ensures its own functioning. Think of those glass mirror mazes where the mirror reflects itself into infinity. In this kind of way, the ideology self-perpetuates itself. So just as God needs men, and so therefore created them in his own image, so too do all subjects duplicate into other subjects, creating this self-perpetuating system of subjects interpolated by an ideology. And the best part is that subjects work by themselves, or most of them do anyways. And if they don't, if they're bad subjects, they get subjected to the RSAs, the repressive state apparatuses, where other subjects will ensure that you remain a subject of the ideology, if only by means of violence or threat thereof.
What's happening? Nothing. Just tell me what's happening.
Drop the poster. We're remodeling.
No, you're not. What are those people doing?
What about business? It's full of you.
You don't tell me what's happening, I'll report you!
Well, you're trespassing.
So breaking the rules doesn't mean that you're outside the ideology, because being punished is also a position within it. Ideology is total, and it keeps you where you are. As the system is set up to support the production and exchange of capital, capital does, however, provide exceptions, for those with a lot of wealth anyways. We're taught to participate in group work unless you can get away with it. We're taught to pay taxes unless you can afford a good accountant or a lawyer to avoid it. We're taught to protect the environment unless you can pay the fine.
Forget the politicians. The politicians are put there to give you the idea that you have freedom of choice. You don't. You have no choice. You have owners. They own you. They own everything.
So in this way, those at the top might be seen as being exempt from it, but the ideology keeps the status quo in place. That is, it keeps most people in place. It isn't real, it's imaginary, and it only continues to work because people believe it does, until it doesn't.
In case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Yeah.
Cease transmission.
Ceasing transmission.
You want another slice?
No, I'm okay.
What else is on?
Yeah, let's see what else.
Where's
is
the
on.
TV guy?